And so being able to think clearly and fluidly about risk, I think, is one of the most important skills to being able to fast track your own success. And that's something that I found poker equipped me very well for. But most people I know, even who are, who I think very, very capable, very promising people, just don't have that. They don't have that ability to think about risk that way.
Okay, well, here's our challenge for today. If we could if we could equip people with that, that'd be pretty cool. So obviously, it takes years of training, and most of us aren't poker players. But what do you think those of us who aren't poker players can take from that? How can we learn to manage that risk and mitigate it? Well, not mitigate it, but like you said, think about risk.
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I don't know that I have it's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer that can be communicated by you listening to what I'm saying and then you changing your perspective on risk, right? I think changing your perspective on risk really comes from experience. And it's extremely difficult to get somebody to understand that just verbally. So here's my mental model of how most people think about risk, is that most of the time, let's say that I'm telling you, hey, I think that it would make sense for you to, take all of your money and go use it to start a business in some field that you've never heard of, and it's by far the best thing you could possibly do, right? If I were to suggest to you something like that, like really actually you in your life as it is right now, right?
All right, I'm ready.
What is your intuitive reaction to me telling you that? Take all the money you have, put it into a business.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh man, I was enjoying this podcast. That's a shame. I gotta drop that now.
Well, you wait till the end of the day.
And then I'm like, ooh, yeah, I've got to collect that money together. Is it enough? Will it work? I don't even know what business I want to do. I mean, the list definitely goes on. Those are the gut thoughts, I guess.
So those are the obvious things. Those are the surface things, right? Like, what am I actually doing?
Okay.
But then once you get to the idea, okay, let's say that I tell you what you're going to do. You're going to do this. You're going to put this much money here. Blah blah blah. Let's say we have all the details worked out, right? Where, like, you'll notice if you really seriously. I mean, it's hard to do.
No, I'm thinking about it. I'm feeling a bit of a knot forming my stomach. Being like, oh fuck, this is real. I've got to do this now.
Right. And what are you actually afraid of? Is the question.
Oh, it's great. We should swap. This is great.
Like, what are you actually afraid of?
I'm afraid of just the empty void. Like in my head, it's like, I got to do this, but I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know. Maybe because I haven't charted it out, but yeah, that seems pretty daunting. I think daunting is the right word, actually.
That's right. So I think if you roll it out, like think about really taking a big risk in your life. Most people, I think there's a relatively small number of things that their fear really stems from. So one, it's a fear of failure, right? Fear that if I go and do this, if I fail, which seems very likely, everyone is going to see me fail. And I'm going to waste my time. I'm going to waste my money. I'm going to waste my social capital.
Stupid.
Right? I'm going to look like an idiot to all my friends. And I'm going to come crawling back later, broke, without having money. Right? They're afraid of failure. And oftentimes it's not even afraid of the actual act of failure, but it's afraid of being seen as a failure. The second thing they're afraid of course, is that like the fear of just complete catastrophe. Right? So like, if I lose all my money in this business venture, right, what could happen to me? I might be, on the street. I'd get evicted. I would like go move in with my, it's hard to even imagine what would happen if you lost all of your money. And so it's sort of like this cloud of fear that comes in front of what would really happen. And there are a few other things that people are afraid of, but I feel like that those are the two biggest things. Is what would happen if things went wrong, and what would happen if other people saw me as a failure, and if I see myself as a failure. And so I think here's one of the things that poker teaches you how to do very quickly, is that in poker, you're facing a bet and you have to decide to take the risk, right? Whether or not you want to call, fold, raise, whatever, right? Let's say someone's pushing you, someone makes a bet and you have to go all in to meet this bet, right? It's a lot of money. And if you call the bet and you're wrong, you look really stupid. And everyone sees that you were trying to call with this really stupid hand. You thought they were full of shit. Everybody else sees like, oh, it's really obvious they had a hand. You're going to look like a moron. Right? You learn very quickly that if you can't be willing to look like a moron, you're just never going to make money in poker. It's just not possible, right? You have to be willing to say, look, I don't care if I look like an idiot. I'm willing to make a bet because I believe it's right, and I don't care what other people think of me when I do this, right? You train that day in and day out as a poker player of constantly having to decide, regardless of what other people think, do I think it's right? Do I think the risk justifies the reward, right? The second thing is that it causes you to also think clearly about what happens when you're wrong. So most people, like if you think about starting a business, they just like imagine, man, if this business fails, like it'll just be horrible. It'll be so terrible. I'll feel like such a piece of shit, and like my life will fall apart. But they don't like really seriously think like, okay, well, what actually would happen? Well, I would close down the business, and then I would like ask my friends to like loan me some money. I would go get a job. Probably my old boss would take me back. I could go and start earning some money. Maybe take me like 6 months to earn it back. Then I'd pay back my friends, and then I'd be back where I started. And like honestly, my life wouldn't change that much. Like if you really, really think it through, you're like, wait, shit. The downside is not this like uncapped void of darkness. The downside is like this really real thing that you can actually, reason about very clearly and say like, okay, look, on the one side is the reward. On the other side is the risk of downside, which is tangible, right? I can actually think through what that downside would be. Until you can do that, you cannot actually evaluate risks. Until you can actually do that with clarity of mind, like instead it's like this, Pascal's wager, but the opposite side, where, getting it wrong, or it's Pascal's wager on the positive side, getting it wrong is infinitely bad, and getting it right, like maybe is good. But if getting it wrong is infinitely bad, you're never going to take that risk.
So this sounds like to me, and you talk about this, it's almost like you're saying people need to train themselves to ignore the immediate gut reaction and instead try and think through like the counterfactual. Like actually, yes, this is what I think I see about the world, but let's flip it on its head for this alternate reality, which maybe is actually more likely than I think. Is that, how do people actually do that though?
I think that's right. I think training yourself when you're feeling afraid of some kind of risk is to, when your gut is telling you something's wrong, when your gut is telling you something is scary, one of the things that you learn as a poker player is that your gut is only one of the many signals that you should be listening to in determining how you should act, right? There's like this, there's this, kind of very lame trope about poker players that like, what you do is you stare in the other person's eyes and you kind of read into their soul, and that's how you decide what you're going to do with your hand, right? And that's not true. You do look into someone's eyes and try to figure out what
crush their soul.
Crush their soul. But it's one of many inputs into your decision of what you're going to do, right? In the same way, your own gut reaction is a sign. Your body knows a lot of stuff that your brain doesn't, but it's only one of many signals that you need to interpret in figuring out what is actually going on in this situation. So when you're afraid of something, especially if that thing is a risk that you don't fully understand, your gut reaction almost always is a sign that it's something that you've never done before. Very rarely are you afraid of things on a gut level that you've already done, right? Like if you have never taken out the trash in your life, you're probably gonna be terrified of touching a trash can, right? You're gonna have a gut reaction that like, if I touch this thing, I'm just gonna be soiled in a way that I'm never gonna be able to wash off of me. But the first time you do it, it's fine, right? Like, or sorry, after you do it a couple times, it's fine. Same thing with like, if you've never touched blood before, right? But if you become a paramedic, look, like eventually you get to the place where it's like, okay, yeah, it's fine. I just wear gloves. It's cool. Like I'm not going to die by touching blood. In the same way, taking risks is kind of the same thing. So it's true that you need to be able to think through to the counterfactual, right? But it's incredibly difficult to do that when you're overwhelmed with this gut reaction. If the gut reaction is so strong that you can't even get past it, the thing you have to start doing, at least in relatively small ways, is to start taking those risks. Start doing some of the things that trigger that gut reaction into you, and like treat it as a science experiment. Like look at what's going on in your gut and investigate like, hey, okay, my gut's feeling this way. What happens if I go and do it? And I go and like think very clearly about what it is my gut is responding to. Sort of, poke it in different ways, see how it responds to what you're doing. And the more you do that with different smaller things in your life, the easier it's going to be to take that attitude and that perspective of curiosity about your own reactions and take that into the bigger risks that you can consider in your life. That would be my advice to somebody.